Eleanor traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, her finger following the delicate, hand-painted violets. The cup was part of a set Arthur had given her on their 5th anniversary. It was one of the few things in the grand, echoing house that felt truly hers. For 50 years, she had been the quiet caretaker of this home and the family within it. She was the keeper of schedules, the mender of clothes, the soother of fevers, the silent witness to a life that unfolded around her but rarely included her at its center. She had raised Arthur's children from his first marriage as if they were her own. David and Cynthia were already toddlers when she arrived, a timid bride stepping into a ready-made family. She had loved them with a fierce, unrequited devotion. She had packed their school lunches and cheered at their games, her applause swallowed by the noise of other, more legitimate mothers. She had held their hands after scraped knees and broken hearts, offering a comfort they accepted as their due. They had grown into adults who regarded her with a polite, dismissive tolerance. She was a fixture, like the grandfather clock in the hall or the worn Persian rug in the study. She was useful, but not essential. Present, but not seen. Now Arthur was gone. A sudden, silent departure in the night that had left a void not just in her bed, but in the very air of the house. The silence he left behind was heavier than any sound. The family had descended upon the house not with grief, but with the sharp-eyed focus of appraisers. Section Cynthia, her daughter-in-law by marriage to a man Eleanor had never met, led the charge. She moved through the rooms with a clipboard and a disdainful sniff, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors like tiny, angry hammers. David, Arthur's son, followed in her wake, his expression a mask of strained sympathy that did not reach his eyes. And Marcus, Cynthia's son and Arthur's grandson by a different line, a young man with an old man's avarice, trailed behind them, his phone held up to catalog the assets. Eleanor had become invisible in her own home. They spoke over her, around her, through her, their conversations a flurry of trusts and assets and market values. She was a ghost at a banquet, her presence an inconvenient footnote in the grand story of their inheritance. The day of the will reading arrived, cloaked in a cold, drizzling rain that matched the chill in her heart. They gathered in Arthur's study, a room that still smelled of his pipe tobacco and old books. Mr. Hemlock, the family lawyer, a man whose face seemed composed of solemn, drooping lines, cleared his throat. Eleanor sat in a small chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap. She expected little. Arthur had been a kind man, but a weak one. He had always capitulated to the demands of his children, buying their affection with concessions and appeasements. She had been his quiet harbor, the one who asked for nothing. She assumed he had provided for her, a small pension perhaps, a quiet place to live out her remaining years. Mr. Hemlock began to read in a dry monotone. The house, the stocks, the bonds, the art collection, the summer cottage, it all went to David and Cynthia, to be managed in a trust for their children, including Marcus. A vast fortune, enumerated in cold, legal language. Cynthia preened, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. David looked relieved, the mask of sympathy finally dropping. Eleanor waited. Her name had not been mentioned. Finally, the lawyer paused, shuffled a single, separate sheet of paper, and looked over his spectacles at her. "And to my wife, Eleanor Vance," he read, his voice softening with a flicker of pity. "I leave the property known as the old Havenwood General Store, located in Havenwood County, along with all its contents." A beat of silence. Then a sharp, ugly laugh erupted from Marcus. "The old store?" he scoffed. "Granddad owned that wreck? It's been boarded up for 40 years. It's in the middle of nowhere." Cynthia waved a dismissive hand. "It's worthless. The land is probably contaminated from the old gas pump. It's a liability, not an asset." David, ever the diplomat, leaned forward. "Eleanor, of course, you'll have a reasonable amount of time to vacate the premises here. 30 days. Cynthia has already arranged for an estate sale." 30 days. The words landed like stones in the quiet room. 50 years of her life, and she was being given 30 days to erase herself from it. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the rain-streaked glass. She was being evicted. She was being discarded. The lawyer cleared his throat again, a sound of genuine discomfort this time. There is one more item, a personal effect. He gestured to a large, dark object leaning against the wall, previously hidden by a dust cover. Marcus pulled the cover away with a theatrical flourish. It was a heavy, sea-worn wooden chest, bound with rusted iron straps. It was weathered and ancient, looking as if it had been pulled from the belly of a sunken ship. "Also for you, Eleanor," David said, his tone magnanimous, as if bestowing a great treasure. "Father kept it in the attic. Never opened it, far as I know. Probably full of old junk." Cynthia walked over and kicked it lightly with the toe of her expensive shoe. "More clutter. You can take it with you to your general store." The way she said the words dripped with contempt. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across Eleanor's chest and up her neck. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, not with sympathy, but with a cold, clinical assessment. She was the loose end being tied up, the final piece of clutter being disposed of. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. Her legs felt unsteady, but her back was straight. She looked not at Cynthia or David, but at the lawyer. "Thank you, Mr. Hemlock," she said, her voice a quiet thread in the charged air. She turned and walked out of the study, not looking back at the faces of the people she had once considered family. She did not see the shared, smug glances. She did not hear Cynthia's muttered comment to her son, "Well, that's that. Finally." She only felt the cold, hard finality of the door clicking shut behind her. The next 30 days were a blur of systematic erasure. Cynthia was brutally efficient. Stickers appeared on everything: red for the estate sale, yellow for storage, green for trash. Eleanor watched as 50 years of memories were categorized and priced. The armchair where she had read stories to a young David, red sticker. The dining table where she had served thousands of meals, red sticker. Sections the bed she had shared with Arthur for half a century, green sticker. "It was too old," Cynthia declared. "No one would want it." Eleanor was allowed one suitcase. She packed methodically, choosing items not for their monetary value, but for the weight of the memories they held. A few worn novels, her mother's locket, a photograph of her and Arthur on their wedding day, both of them so young and full of a quiet, hopeful light. The teacup with the violets. She wrapped it carefully in a soft woolen scarf and placed it in the center of the suitcase. The large wooden chest sat in the hallway, an impassive, silent witness to the dismantling of her life. No one touched it. It was hers, and therefore worthless. On the final day, a moving truck arrived for the chest. She had used the last of her small personal savings to have it transported to Havenwood, a place she had only ever heard Arthur mention in passing. Cynthia stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as the movers loaded the chest. "Sending your treasure on ahead?" she asked, her voice laced with mock sweetness. Eleanor did not reply. She looked at the house one last time, the grand facade that had been her entire world. It no longer looked like a home. It looked like a museum of a life that was over. With her single suitcase in hand, she walked down the stone path, away from the only home she had ever known. She did not look back. The bus journey to Havenwood was a descent into a deep, cold fear. With every mile that passed, her old life receded, and the terrifying uncertainty of her future loomed larger. She was 72 years old. She had no money, no home, and no family that would claim her. She had a dilapidated general store in a town she had never seen, and a heavy wooden chest full of what was likely nothing more than dust and spiders. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She stared out the window at the passing landscape, the green fields giving way to dense, unfamiliar forests. She felt a profound loneliness, a sense of being utterly untethered from the world. She had devoted her life to others, and in the end she had been deemed disposable. The bus finally pulled into Havenwood. It was less a town and more a crossroads. A handful of buildings huddled together as if for warmth, surrounded by an ocean of trees. The air was different here, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. The bus driver, a man with a kind, weathered face, helped her with her suitcase. "The old general store?" he said, pointing down the quiet main street. "It's that one at the end. Been empty since before I was born, I reckon." Eleanor thanked him and began the slow walk toward her inheritance. The building was worse than she had imagined. It sagged in the middle, its paint peeled away to reveal gray, weathered wood. The windows were boarded up, and a faded sign hanging by one hinge read, "Havenwood General." A single rusty gas pump stood out front like a skeletal sentinel. The moving truck had already come and gone, leaving the heavy chest on the covered porch, looking like a piece of driftwood washed ashore. The lawyer had sent her a single, rusty key in the mail. With a trembling hand, she inserted it into the lock on the front door. It turned with a groan of protest. The door swung inward, opening into a cavern of dust and shadows. The air inside was thick and stale, the smell of decades of disuse. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in golden shafts. The interior was a time capsule. Empty shelves lined the walls, coated in a thick layer of gray dust. A long wooden counter ran the length of the room. An old-fashioned cash register sat on the counter, its keys frozen in place. It was desolate. It was hopeless. Eleanor stepped inside and set her suitcase down. The door swung shut behind her, plunging her into near darkness. And in the sudden, oppressive silence, the despair she had been holding at bay finally broke over her. She sank down onto the dusty floor, leaned her back against the cold counter, and wept. She wept for her lost home, for her lost life. She wept for Arthur, for his weakness that had led her to this place. She wept for her own foolishness, for believing that a lifetime of devotion would ever be enough. She was alone, in a derelict building, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing. This was the end. She fell asleep there, on the floor, exhaustion finally overpowering her grief. She awoke to a sliver of morning light and the sound of a bird singing outside. The despair of the night before had receded, leaving behind a hollow ache. She was still here. She was still alive. Forcing herself to her feet, her old bones protesting, she began to explore her new, grim reality. Behind the main store area was a small apartment, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a single bedroom. It was all coated in the same thick dust, but it was intact. The plumbing groaned, but water, rusty at first, eventually ran from the taps. The electricity, to her astonishment, worked. A single, bare bulb flickered to life in the kitchen. It was a glimmer, a tiny, fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. She spent the first day cleaning. The work was hard, physical, and blessedly mindless. She swept away the webs of time, scrubbed the grime from the floors, and washed the windows of the small apartment. As she worked, a strange sense of ownership began to settle over her. This place was a wreck. It was an insult, but it was hers. No one could take it from her. No one could put a sticker on it and sell it out from under her. That evening, she sat in the clean, empty kitchen, drinking a cup of tea made with water heated on the ancient stove. She had used the last of her cash to buy a few groceries from the small market across the street. The owner, a burly man named Samuel with kind eyes and a warm smile, had looked at her with curiosity, but not pity. "You're the one who's taken the old Vance place," he'd said. "Arthur Vance's wife?" Eleanor had nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "He used to come up here in the summers when he was a boy. His family owned this store. Haven't seen him in 50 years, but folks around here have long memories." Section. It was a small connection, but it felt like a lifeline. For the next few days, a routine formed. She would wake, clean a section of the store, and explore. The building, she discovered, had good bones. The wood was solid oak and cedar. The foundation was stone. Beneath the dust and decay, there was a sense of enduring quality. It had been built to last. Finally, she turned her attention to the chest. It was too heavy to move by herself, so it remained on the porch. She ran her hands over the rough, salt-bleached wood. The iron straps were pitted with rust, and a heavy, ornate lock secured the lid. There was no key. She had searched the envelope from the lawyer, her suitcase, her pockets. Nothing. It was just another one of Arthur's oversights, she thought with a pang of bitterness. Or perhaps a final, cruel joke. A locked box with no key, a perfect metaphor for her life. She sat on the porch steps, staring at the chest as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She felt a flicker of the old despair. What was she doing here? Cleaning a ruin? Waiting for nothing? Just then, Samuel from the market crossed the street, holding a covered dish. "Thought you might appreciate a hot meal," he said, handing her a shepherd's pie that was still warm from the oven. "It's not easy settling in." His kindness was so unexpected, so genuine, that it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He noticed her staring at the chest. "That's a serious bit of luggage." "It was my husband's," she explained. "There's no key." Samuel squinted at the lock. "That's not the kind of lock you use a key on. Not a normal one, anyway. That's an old puzzle lock. My grandfather used to collect them." He knelt beside the chest, his big, gentle hands examining the ironwork. "See these rivets?" he said, pointing to the small, round heads of iron embedded in the straps. "Some of them aren't rivets. They're buttons. You have to press them in the right sequence." Eleanor's heart gave a little flutter. A puzzle lock. Arthur had loved puzzles. Crosswords, riddles, brain teasers. He had a playful, clever side that he had rarely shown to his demanding children. This was not an oversight. This was a message. "A sequence?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Could be anything," Samuel said, standing up. "A date, a name, anything important." He wished her good luck and went on his way, leaving Eleanor alone with the chest and the newfound secret. A date, a name. She sat there for a long time, the shepherd's pie forgotten on the step beside her. She thought back over her 50 years with Arthur. She tried their wedding date, nothing. She tried his birthday, nothing. She tried the children's birthdays. The rivets remained stubbornly fixed. Frustration mounted. It was another one of his games, and she was tired of playing. She was about to give up when a different memory surfaced. It was from their first year of marriage. She had been so lonely in that big house, so intimidated by his children. One evening, Arthur had found her crying quietly in the garden. He had sat with her, not saying anything for a long time. Then he had pointed to a small, shy flower blooming in the shade of a large rose bush. "That's a violet," he had said softly. "My mother's favorite. She said they were quiet and strong and bloomed where you least expected them. They reminded her of hope." He had looked at her then, really looked at her, and said, "They remind me of you, Eleanor." It was one of the few truly beautiful moments she held on to. Violet. Her fingers, clumsy with a sudden, surging hope, moved to the rivets. There were more than 26 of them. She found the one that corresponded with V. She pushed. It clicked, sinking slightly into the wood. I click. O click. L click. E click. T click. With the final push, there was a loud metallic clank from within the chest. The heavy lock sprang open. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the open lock, her heart pounding against her ribs. With trembling hands, she lifted the heavy lid. It creaked open, releasing the scent of cedar and old paper. She peered inside. It was almost empty. The bottom was lined with faded blue velvet. In the center, resting alone, was a single, thick envelope sealed with wax. Her name was written on the front in Arthur's familiar, elegant script. Beside the envelope lay a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a sparrow. Disappointment washed over her, sharp and bitter. All that for a letter? She sank back on her heels. The grand secret was just a note and a trinket, but then her fingers brushed against the velvet lining. It felt loose. Her curiosity piqued. She hooked a finger under the edge of the velvet and pulled. It came away easily, revealing not solid wood, but a false bottom. Beneath it was not treasure, not gold or jewels, but something far more unexpected. It was a meticulously crafted scale model of the general store. Every detail was perfect, from the tiny, sagging sign to the individual boards on the porch. It was a dollhouse, a perfect replica of the building she was in. She lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than it looked. As she examined it, her fingers traced the long wooden counter inside the miniature store. She felt a small, almost imperceptible seam in the wood. Pressing gently, a section of the floor of the model popped up. Beneath it was a tiny brass key. A key. But what did it open? Her eyes scanned the miniature building again, and she saw it. At the back of the model, where the small apartment should be, there was no apartment. Instead, there was a single tiny door set into the floorboards. Her heart began to race. She set the model aside and hurried back into the store, her mind whirling. She went to the back room, the small apartment she had so carefully cleaned. She looked at the floor. It was made of wide oak planks, just like the rest of the building. She got on her hands and knees, her eyes scanning the floorboards, searching for a seam, a line, anything out of place. There, underneath where a rug would have gone, almost invisible, was the faint outline of a trapdoor. And set flush with the wood was a small brass keyhole, identical to the one in the model. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the tiny key. She inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a turn of her wrist, there was a soft click. She found a small indentation and pulled. The trapdoor lifted, revealing a set of steep, narrow stone steps leading down into darkness. A cool, dry air wafted up, carrying the scent of earth and something else, something clean and metallic. Flicking on the bare bulb in the room for light, she took a deep breath and started down the steps. The stone was cool and solid under her feet. At the bottom, she found a light switch on the wall. She flipped it, and the world changed. She was standing in a vast, subterranean space. It was not a cellar, it was a workshop. The room was huge, easily 3 times the size of the store above it. The walls were lined with custom-built cabinetry and shelves. Workbenches made of gleaming maple held intricate tools, all neatly arranged. In the center of the room, under a series of bright, clean spotlights, were several large objects draped in white cloths. It was clean, impeccably clean. Not a speck of dust, not a single cobweb. It looked as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Slowly, as if in a dream, Eleanor walked toward the center of the room. She reached out a trembling hand and pulled the cloth off the nearest object. It was a vintage motorcycle, restored to gleaming perfection. Its chrome shone, its leather seat was flawless. She pulled the cloth off the next, a beautiful, handcrafted wooden boat, its hull smooth and sleek. And the next, a collection of exquisite, handmade clocks, their brass pendulums still and silent. This was Arthur's secret. This was where he went on his business trips, the ones he took alone. This was his sanctuary, a place where he was not a weak-willed patriarch, but a master craftsman. On a large desk in the corner, she saw a leather-bound ledger. She opened it. It was filled with Arthur's handwriting. It was a record of sales. He had been selling his creations, quietly, for decades. Motorcycles to collectors, clocks to connoisseurs, boats to enthusiasts. The prices listed next to each item made her gasp. She flipped to the final pages. It was a summary of an account. A bank account in a Swiss bank. The number at the bottom of the page had so many zeros she had to count them twice. It was a fortune far larger than the one he had left to his children. Her knees felt weak. She sank into the leather chair behind the desk. Her eyes fell on the envelope she still clutched in her hand. With numb fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my greatest and most cowardly plan has been set in motion. I am sorry. I am so sorry for the public humiliation I have put you through. It was the only way. I have lived my life as a coward, Eleanor. I knew my children, and Cynthia, saw me only as a source of money. I saw their greed, their coldness. I saw how they treated you, my quiet, strong Violet, and I did nothing. I bought their hollow affection because I was too weak to demand their respect. I knew that if I left you anything of obvious value, they would have found a way to take it from you. They would have contested the will, bullied you, worn you down until you had nothing. Their greed is a bottomless pit. So I devised this, a public insult, to make them believe you were left with nothing, to make them discard you and forget you. The store, this place of my own happy childhood memories, was the perfect cover. This workshop, this money, it is all yours, Eleanor. It is the fruit of the only part of my life where I felt strong and free. I want you to be strong and free now. This is your home. This is your security. This is your new beginning. In the bottom drawer of this desk, you will find another set of documents. I discovered them by accident. They are proof of Cynthia's long-term embezzlement from the family company. I was too afraid to confront her in life, but perhaps they can serve as your shield now, should she ever bother you again. Live, Eleanor. Live for yourself. Find your own joy. Build your own life. You have earned it 1,000 times over. You were the only true and honest thing in my world. Forgive my weakness and know that I loved you. Yours always, Arthur. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but they were not tears of grief or despair. They were tears of a profound, earth-shattering revelation. He had seen her. All those years, he had seen her. He had understood her pain, her loneliness, her quiet strength. His weakness had not been indifference, it had been a prison. And from within that prison, he had forged her a key. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside was a thick folder. It contained bank statements, forged invoices, and a detailed summary of Cynthia's fraud, all meticulously compiled by Arthur. It was leverage. It was power. It was a weapon. Eleanor sat back in the chair, the letter in one hand, the folder in the other. The silence of the workshop surrounded her, a silence not of emptiness, but of potential. She was not a victim. She was not a poor old woman left to rot. She was the heir to a secret kingdom. A slow, quiet strength began to fill the hollow spaces inside her. The despair was gone, burned away by the bright, clean light of the truth. In its place, a new feeling was taking root. Resolve. The next morning, Eleanor walked into Samuel's market with a new light in her eyes. "Samuel," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I'm going to need some help. I'm reopening the store." Samuel looked at her, at the quiet determination in her face, and a slow smile spread across his. "I know just the people to talk to," he said. The transformation of the Havenwood General Store became the talk of the small town. Samuel introduced her to a retired carpenter, a plumber, and an electrician who were happy for the work. Eleanor paid them well, using a small portion of the funds from the Swiss account, which a lawyer in the next town had helped her access. She directed the renovations with a clear vision. Sections. The old shelves were taken down, sanded, and refinished. Sections. The floors were polished until the old oak gleamed. Sections. The facade was painted a cheerful, welcoming blue. She worked alongside the crew, painting, cleaning, her physical strength growing with her sense of purpose. The townspeople watched with approval. They had seen her arrive, a frail, sad figure. They saw her now, a woman coming into her own, breathing life back into a piece of their shared history. She transformed the small apartment into a cozy, comfortable home. She bought new furniture, a soft armchair, a comfortable bed. She placed the violet teacup on a small table by the window, where it caught the morning light. But the main floor of the store was not for selling groceries. She had a different plan. She filled the shelves with books, both new and used. She set up comfortable chairs and reading lamps. She installed a counter with a coffee machine and a place for homemade cakes. She was creating a library, a community living room, a sanctuary. Her secret workshop below remained her private world. In the evenings, she would descend the stone steps and simply be in the space. She would run her hands over the smooth wood of the boat, admire the intricate gears of the clocks. She felt Arthur's presence there, not as a ghost, but as a quiet, encouraging energy. She was not just inhabiting his sanctuary, she was becoming its new keeper. Months passed. The Havenwood Library and Cafe was a success. It became the heart of the town, a place where people gathered to read, talk, and connect. Eleanor, once invisible, was now a beloved and respected figure. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the discarded wife. She was Eleanor of Havenwood, the woman who had brought the old store back to life. She had found not just security, but purpose. She had found a community. She had found herself. Section 1 sunny afternoon, as she was arranging a fresh batch of muffins on the counter, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Eleanor's heart did not flutter with fear. It settled into a cold, calm stillness. Cynthia, David, and Marcus stepped out of the car. They stared at the restored building, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. They had clearly expected to find a ruin. They walked in, their city clothes and arrogant expressions wildly out of place in the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the library. Cynthia's eyes swept the room, her gaze sharp and appraising. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "You've been busy." "Eleanor," David said, attempting his old false warmth. "We were in the area. We heard you'd done some work on the place. We wanted to see how you were." Marcus sneered. "Looks like you came into some money. Did you sell some of Granddad's old junk after all?" Eleanor finished arranging the muffins before turning to face them. She was no longer the hunched, invisible woman from the will reading. She stood tall, her posture elegant, her expression calm and unreadable. She had dressed carefully that morning in a simple but well-made dress. Her hair was neatly styled. She radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence. The power shift was immediate and palpable. They had come expecting to find her destitute, perhaps to offer a pittance in exchange for the worthless land. They found a queen in her own castle. "Cynthia, David, Marcus," she said, her voice even and cool. "This is a surprise." "Where did you get the money for all this, Eleanor?" Cynthia demanded, dropping all pretense of civility. "That's what I want to know." Eleanor smiled, a small, knowing smile that did not reach her eyes. "Arthur was a man of many secrets," she said softly. She gestured to a small table in the corner. "Please sit. I'll bring you some coffee." They sat, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the books and the quiet hum of the townspeople. Eleanor returned with a tray. She placed a cup of coffee in front of each of them. Then she placed a fourth item on the table, the thick folder from Arthur's desk. Cynthia's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she recognized the logo of the family company on the forged invoices visible through the folder's flap. A flicker of panic crossed her face. "I believe this belongs to you, Cynthia," Eleanor said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. David and Marcus looked from the folder to Cynthia, confused. "What is that?" David asked. "It's a record," Eleanor said calmly, a record of a great deal of money that went missing from Arthur's company over the past 15 years. Money that seems to have found its way into certain offshore accounts. The color drained from Cynthia's face. "That's a lie," she hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Eleanor replied. "Arthur was a meticulous man. He compiled quite a bit of evidence. Bank transfers, signed documents. It's all in there. I imagine the authorities would find it very interesting." Silence descended on the table. A heavy, suffocating silence. David stared at Cynthia, a look of dawning horror on his face. Marcus looked from his mother to Eleanor, his usual arrogance replaced by a craven fear. They were trapped. Checkmate. Eleanor leaned forward, her composure absolute. "Here is what is going to happen," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in to hear. "You are going to sign a document which my lawyer has already prepared. It will relinquish any and all future claims you might believe you have on Arthur's estate, including this property." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In return for your signatures, this folder and its contents will remain with me, locked away, a secret, just as Arthur would have wanted." Her eyes met Cynthia's. "You will leave Havenwood. You will never contact me again. You will allow me to live my life in peace. If you violate any of those terms, this folder goes to the district attorney." It was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. Cynthia stared at her, her face a mask of fury and impotent rage. She had been so sure of her victory, so confident in Eleanor's weakness. To be defeated so completely, so quietly, by the woman she had dismissed as a piece of furniture, it was more than she could bear. "You planned this," she whispered venomously. "You and that old fool." "Arthur was many things," Eleanor said, her voice softening with a trace of old affection. "But he was no fool. He simply loved his family, even when they didn't deserve it." She pushed the legal documents in a pen across the table. "Sign them." There was no other choice. Ruin and public disgrace on one hand, a silent, humiliating retreat on the other. With a hand that trembled with rage, Cynthia snatched the pen and signed her name. David, looking pale and shaken, followed suit. Marcus, his face ashen, scribbled his signature without a word. Eleanor took the documents back and neatly placed them in her apron pocket. "Your coffee is getting cold," she said, her voice once again light and pleasant. They stood up, their defeat total. They walked out of the library without another word, their proud, arrogant postures gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of the utterly vanquished. Eleanor watched them drive away, the black car disappearing down the road, a dark smudge against the bright, clean day. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel hatred. She felt peace, a deep, quiet, and profound peace. The past was finally laid to rest. She turned back to her counter, to the smell of coffee and old books, to the gentle murmur of her friends and neighbors. She picked up a cloth and began to polish the already gleaming counter. A young girl came up to her, holding a book. "Eleanor, can you read this to us?" Eleanor looked at the child's upturned, hopeful face. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Of course, my dear," she said. "Of course I can." Years passed. The Havenwood Library and Cafe flourished, becoming a landmark. Eleanor, with the help of a discreet financial advisor, established a foundation using the vast wealth from Arthur's secret life. The foundation provided scholarships for the children of Havenwood, funded community projects, and offered grants to artisans and craftspeople, honoring the spirit of the man who had made it all possible. She never touched the workshop below. It remained as it was, a silent, beautiful museum to her husband's hidden passion. It was a place of memory and gratitude, a private chapel of the soul. She never heard from Cynthia, David, or Marcus again. They faded from her life like a bad dream. She heard whispers through the legal grapevine that their fortunes had dwindled, their lives unraveling under the weight of their own bitterness and greed. Their ill-gotten gains had brought them no joy. Eleanor, on the other hand, had found more joy than she had ever thought possible. Her life was not grand or loud. It was quiet, and it was full. It was filled with the laughter of children, the friendship of her neighbors, the smell of baking, and the quiet rustle of turning pages. One evening, she sat in her soft armchair in her cozy apartment above the library. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. She held the violet teacup in her hands, its delicate pattern worn smooth by the passage of time. She thought of the woman who had traced its rim in a cold, grand house, feeling invisible and lost. She thought of the journey that had brought her from that place of despair to this place of peace. She had been erased. She had been eliminated. But a seed of strength, planted long ago by a quiet, hopeful love, had found a place to bloom. She was not a victim who had been rescued. She was a quiet, strong flower who had finally been given enough light to grow. And she had grown into a magnificent garden, offering shade and beauty to everyone around her. Her true inheritance had not been the money or the workshop. It had been the chance to discover the person she was meant to be all along. Eleanor of Havenwood took a slow, contented sip of her tea. She was home,